Здравствуйте, вы смотрите Варп-Маяк, первый российский независимый видеоподкаст о варгеймах, настольных и ролевых играх. Сегодня мы записываем интервью с одним из самых замечательных писателей Black Library, который подарил нам серию книг про ультрамаринов, железных воинов, много книг по ереси Хорса, в том числе Фулгрим, Тысяча сынов и так далее. Ну что ж, давайте, собственно, приступим. Hi, Graham.
Hello.
And you guys are watching Warp-Mayak, and today with me here is Graham McNeill, Black Library's best author, and the man who made me play Ultramarines for such a long time. Hi, Graham. Say hi to your Russian fans.
Hello to everybody in Russia. How are you doing today?
Okay, so we got a huge list of questions. We started collecting them about 1 month ago, and we selected top 25 questions for you, Graham.
Okay.
And they're separated into different groups. We're going to be talking about general stuff, Ultramarines, fantasy battles, Iron Warriors, Horus Heresy, and then some other miscellaneous questions.
Some random nonsense. That's all good.
Exactly. I love you. Oh, wow. Look at that cover. It's perfect.
Bring them on.
Okay, so the first thing is, how and when did you discover Warhammer?
Warhammer, I discovered that back in 3rd edition. I was running a role-playing campaign for a couple of friends of mine back when I was, well, I don't know, maybe 16 or so. And the stories I was telling were becoming ever more complex and elaborate, and, you know, rather than just a dungeon bash. They were growing more and more, involving nations and giant battles and so on. And, you know, running that sort of thing in a role-playing game, it just isn't easy. The rules aren't designed for that sort of thing. So I wanted to find a rule set that allowed me to play mass battles. And I came to first of all, to the AD&D battle system, but that was very unwieldy and I didn't like it very much. And I saw Games Workshop in Glasgow city centre, and from there they had Warhammer, and I did a quick demo game with the guys there, and it was brilliant. I fell in love with it, and very quickly after that the role-playing kind of got less and less, and the wargaming got more and more. So that would probably be what, mid to late 80s I got into Warhammer.
Okay, wow, that's quite some time ago.
Yeah, well, you know, I know I look very young and innocent, but I'm actually quite old.
Okay, so
good choice of T-shirt, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's my favorite. Then, secondly, do you play 40k or fantasy battles, and which are your favorite armies for those two systems?
Well, I play both of them. I mean, when I first came to England from Scotland, I worked in the design studio. First of all as a staff writer, then as a games developer myself. So yeah, I played Warhammer, Lord of the Rings, 40k. I have all my armies, you know, still got my Ultramarines, obviously, my Tau, my Necrons, my Empire, my Rohan. But yeah, I mean, over the last few years, I don't get to play war games nearly as much as I would like to, because obviously the writing's taking up a lot of time, as does having two young children. So yeah, once my oldest Evan, he's 3.5, so I'll give him a few years and I'll get him painting some Predators and Land Raiders and you know, get him to do my donkey work.
Yeah, exactly. So I take it that your Ultramarines are the 4th company, obviously. Obviously. I wonder how your Captain Ventress looks like on the tabletop. I can show you mine a bit later on.
Well, mine's packed in a bag in my miniatures case in my office. But my Uriel spends most of his time on his back, being shot dead.
Oh wow!
Like, you know, people who play me tend to try and single out Uriel quite quickly.
Okay. Do you have Pausanias?
Yes, of course. Although, under the rules of the game, I'm not technically allowed to field him the way he is in the books.
Yes.
So, you know, he can't give a veteran sergeant a heavy flamer.
Yeah, definitely. Like when I first read it, and then I I was, well, you know, I knew the rules, not nearly as good as I know them now, but I was like, what? He's wearing like half Terminator armor, and he's got a heavy flamer, and he's a sergeant. How does he lead a squad like this? And yeah, did you have like any kind of notion from the editors at Black Library when you wrote that?
Oh yeah. Well, I knew that wasn't. I mean, it's very much a case of the needs of the story outweigh the needs of the rules. And I'd seen the cover, Clint Langley's cover of the book, long before I finished the novel, and I'd seen Uriel front and centre, and the guy behind him, the sergeant with the giant heavy flamer, and thought, that's cool, that's going in the book. And, you know, because that, you know, whenever you're writing it, you cannot be too hidebound by what the rules say, because that's just what you are allowed to field in the tabletop. That's not necessarily the be-all and end-all of the
Yes,
reality, so to speak, of the chapter structure. You know, and if a veteran sergeant wants a heavy flamer, who's going to say no to him?
Yeah, you can have it. You can have
exactly.
it.
You know, that's the thing. I mean, you know, a lot of writers have, you know, bent the codex or the rules for something that helps the story, and you know, you can do, because the codex is just a guide for what you can have in a tabletop. It's not, you know, as prescriptive as that when it comes to the stories.
Definitely, a lot of players just don't realize that, so that's what we're trying to fix with our podcasts. You know, like a lot of people think, and they say that if it's not in the codex,
it can't be in the book. Which
it's impossible.
You know,
which is wrong.
Don't get me wrong. You don't want to. You can't just flout what's in a codex. You can't trample all over it. But there is wiggle room. There is places where it can bend before it breaks.
So, which is your favorite 40K character and why? I mean, it could be any character, not necessarily created by you, or you know, just any like, who's your favorite guy?
Oh, now you're asking. I've always Eisenhorn's always been a favorite, even before I read Dan's novels. When we were working on the Inquisitor rulebook, a lot of the stuff Gav had written for Eisenhorn and his eventual, you know, arc of story, I thought that was great. And even back then, reading that, thinking, oh, these would be great stories, and then it was like the week after I heard that, oh, Dan's doing stories in that. I thought, excellent. So Eisenhorn's always been, because Inquisitors are just cool. You know, out of all the characters, the vast amount of characters you can have in 40K, Inquisitors not get to have the most fun, but they certainly get to do the most stuff.
Yeah,
and they're the most free in terms of what they can do. Whereas, you know, a Space Marine is more or less stuck with his chapter. He doesn't get to fly about on his own, command, you know, any resource of the Imperium that he wants. So the Inquisitors have a lot more fun in terms of what you can do with them as a writer. So it's tricky, because I keep looking at characters now and thinking, how would I use this guy in a story? Space Marine wise, I would say Calgar's always been a favourite from the beginning. Marnius Calgar, because he's just got. I just love the, you know, as you might guess, I love the Ultramarines background, that sort of classical elements of it, the murdered father, the avenging son, and so on, and how that's carried on into Calgar. And you know, it's been great fun, you know, adding layers to him, certainly in the last book anyway.
Yeah, we all know that you used to work for the Games Workshop Design Studio, and there are still some books out there that are played, that are written by you. For example, Black Templars. Yeah. It is your work, and still people play that. And so, tell us, how did you join the design studio? How it all started for you?
Well, see, that's going back away. Well, it was back in 1999. I was working in an architect's office in Glasgow, and without boring with the details, I was doing a job that was horribly boring and the kind of job you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, kind of tedious. And I was sitting in the office one day thinking, this is hellish, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. And that lunchtime I went out and bought that month's issue of White Dwarf, and there was an advert in it for a staff writer at the design studio, and I thought, well, you know, I reckon I'm not bad at writing, I think I'll give it a shot. And did all the application form, the sample writing, and so on. Went for a couple of interviews, and I was fortunate enough to get offered the job. So in early 2000, I moved to Nottingham, became part of the design studio, and was to begin with doing mostly sort of background and journalistic style articles, you know, reports on tournaments, backgrounds for new Imperial Guard regiments and so on. Because when I first started, the Armageddon campaign was just about to kick off, and there was a whole swathe of background that needed to be written for that. New regiments, new planets, the whole, you know, Armageddon sector had to be written up from the ground, and I did most of that. Mm-hmm. And then from there on, it was a case of, you know, doing little bits here and there for codexes, play testing, reading over the rules, and then just, you know, by increments. And I started writing rules, mostly for Inquisitor to begin with. Then from there, I was doing more and more and more until eventually, when it came to the Witch Hunters Codex, Demon Hunters Codex, myself, Phil Kelly, and Andy Chambers worked on that one together. Before, with Witch Hunters, the following codex, basically me and Andy sort of led that one. So from there on in, I was more or less a fully fledged, you know, games developer, background writer, the lot. And from then on, just carried on and on until eventually 2006, I left to become a full-time freelancer novelist.
Yeah, but why did you leave? I mean, did you get bored with game design, or you just always wanted to be a writer?
I'd always wanted to be a writer, even from, I mean, back in primary school when I was like 7 or 8, I think it was. I wrote my first short story, and, you know, it was, you know, something like a 7 or 8 year old, right? You know, it was a giant octopus coming up out of the water and smashing a fishing boat, sort of thing. But I think I don't have the story anymore, but my teacher at the time obviously thought it was pretty good because she got me up in front of the class to read it. And I've always loved reading stories, telling stories, and I think that's always been, you know, my first passion is telling the stories. So that by the, you know, after 6 years working in the design studio, and I'd written, by this point I'd written 8 novels already, I kind of got to the point where I felt that there was more room for creativity going down the novel route, because we'd been round the Codex and Army Book circuit twice already. Yeah. So we'd written 2 copies of the Space Marine Codex. We'd written Empire twice. We'd done, you know, and it was only going to be the same, not the same, because obviously they evolve each time, but essentially the same thing over and over again. And I think I figured that, you know, to actually fully embrace that sort of level of creativity that I wanted to do, that novels were the way forward. And if I did at that point, if I didn't do it then, I would never do it. So it was into, you know, do it or don't.
Yeah, do or bust. Okay, so you created a whole range of different characters when you wrote, you know, Ultramarines and Horus Heresy and Iron Warriors. Which is by far is your favorite character that you made up?
In terms of to write, I think Honsu is one of my favorites to write, because he gets to do anything he wants to do. There's no codes, no chains binding him. Whatever he wants to do, he can do it. But by the same token, you know, I'm a sucker for heroic stories. So it's nice for the bad guy to win now and again, but I like stories where the good guys win. So Uriel is great fun to write, because he gets to be the kind of person that you would, you know, want your hero to be, you know, because 40k is populated, certainly these days it seems to be populated by, you know, anti-heroes or people who are, you know, the good guys, but only because they're not doing something quite as horrible as the bad guy. Whereas I like that there's a nice contrast that Uriel certainly and the Ultramarines are good guys. You know, yes, they're Space Marines, and yes, they can do terrible things for the greater good, but their heart of what they want to do is for the good of the Imperium. They remember why they were created, that they were warriors of the Emperor to defend humanity. And even though they have an empire for themselves, it's not for their own self-aggrandizement, it's not for their own glory, it's to protect the people in it better. So that aspect of it I like, because it contrasts so nicely with the horrible grimness of 40k.
Definitely. That's actually, you just said exactly the same words that I'm telling my friends and the people I just meet when they find out that I play Ultramarines. They're like, "You play Ultramarines? Everybody plays Ultramarines. They're so boring and they're so like by the book and they're so blah 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 blah." And I'm like, "No, they're actually I think they're only true Space Marines left back from the original era when they were created, because they are shaped and cast in the image of what they were supposed to be, and they're still like that."
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and I think just because you aren't a gigantic space Viking or space vampire doesn't mean you're boring. I mean, I think certainly what we were trying to do is making what they do, the being by the book, as cool a thing as having giant fangs or going berserk in combat sort of thing. That their adherence to the codex is a virtue of what makes them cool, and I try and play that in my Ultramarines books, and Dan did a very good job of that in No Fear as well.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and the last question from the first group would be, it was asked by one of our viewers. Okay, so you're bald, Dan Abnett is bald, Aaron Dembski-Boughton is bald, Ben Counter is almost bald. Does it mean that you guys are the best of Black Library's Redditors for Horse Hairs? Is this some kind of mark? And why you haven't shaved James Swallow yet?
Well, see, the term we prefer is shaven because it implies a choice.
Yes. I'm sorry. Okay, shaven.
Aaron would dispute that with you, because if he didn't shave his head, he would grow hair. It's like a sort of reverse Samson effect. If we grow hair, we grow less talented, less brilliant at what we do. We have to keep the hair shaved so we stay good. And the only reason we haven't shaved James is because he's bigger and stronger than all of us.
Oh, you okay? You cannot tie him down and hold him.
No, we have threatened him with cutting off his ponytail at some point, but then there's a look comes in his eye that you think, yeah, you know what? That would be taking it too far. I'm not even going down that road anymore. It's not funny anymore.
So, having no hair keeps your talent inside your head.
That's right. It would bleed out if I let it grow.
I will never grow hair back again. I'm going to always keep it like this now.
It's straightforward. I mean, long hair so last century.
Exactly. Okay, now moving on into Ultramarines. So, personally, I would like to use this opportunity during this interview to thank you for Real Ventress, for Pausanias, for your depiction of Kelgar, and Vero Tigurius, actually, because I think it was the first time I read about him in any kind of degree in the book from Black Library. I think it was the last book about the Ultramarines, the 6th book.
Yeah, it's the chapters due.
The chapters due when they fought off the demons, and I really loved it. Actually, gotta tell you, I have Chaplain Clausel and a miniature. Well, a converted guy.
Oh, yeah.
And he's actually on a jump pack. It's really hard to play this kind of guy in 6th edition right now, and especially when he's supported by a bunch of Assault Marines. But I'm trying hard.
Yeah, staying true to the story.
Exactly. I'm still converting Pausanias. Got Terminator legs and Terminator chest.
Yeah, I think if you say to your opponent who he is, they'll probably let you off with the heavy flamer aspect, as long as you pay for it in points.
Definitely. And but I got to tell you that for the most part, my chaplain Clausel dies horribly.
He's in the front lines. That's the risk you take being a chaplain.
Yeah, exactly. So, Ultramarines and Iron Warriors, you wrote both of them, and I realize now that you enjoy bad guys because of their freedom, and you like Ultramarines because of their adherence to the Codex. But still, if you had to pick between Ultramarines and Iron Warriors, who would be your favorites?
Oh, favorites. Okay. Probably Ultramarines. Yeah, because I think there's more there's more scope for telling stories of them. I mean, the Iron Warriors, the bad guys get to do all sorts of fun stuff, but then the logic of how they manage to get around the galaxy and do the things they do with ever dwindling numbers become tricky to get around. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I wrote Dead Sky Black Sun. We had in the design studio, me and Andy Hoare had a conversation one very slow Friday afternoon saying, so where did baby Chaos Space Marines come from?
Yeah.
Out of that conversation came that novel, and it's something central to the idea of Space Marines is they can recruit, they can increase their numbers, replace their losses. The Chaos Space Marines can't do that nearly so easily, and that story was an attempt to sort of show how some of them might do it, but warbands, guys out on the road, so to speak, grieving and killing, have a much harder time of it doing that. So, I mean, there's a story in that in itself, but I quite liked, I love telling, with twists and turns along the way, obviously, pretty straight stories of Space Marines at war.
Yeah. Interesting. So, a very important question that plagues me and plagues a lot of Ultramarine players, and, generally a lot of players of Warhammer 40k. Will Rabud Gilliman walk into battle again?
Funny you should mention that. I suspect it could be difficult, certainly. I mean, if ever Workshop decides to say, right, I've had enough of this making money lark, let's just end it all, then yeah, maybe if they do the end of the world, the final battle for the galaxy, the Ranadandra, what have you, maybe. Beyond that, I wouldn't hold my breath.
Yeah, probably, because, from the rumors I heard that in the latest Dark Angels Codex, they actually say that, they've been saying that for quite a few years, that Lion L. Johnson is actually sleeping underneath in some deep bowel chamber of the rock. So, maybe they're planning on reviving him for some reason, I don't know.
Well, certainly that story's been around since the earliest codex of Dark Angels. I haven't seen the new Dark Angel Codex yet, so I can't comment on what it's saying in that.
Yeah, I just heard the rumors.
The thing to remember about the 40k is that it's a setting, not a story. Yeah. It's not like the Legend of the Five Rings kind of thing, where each iteration of the rules or the codex is their version of it advances the storyline. 40k isn't like that.
Yes.
It's always, the clock is always at 2 minutes to midnight. The end of the world is nigh all the time. Everything is collapsing, crumbling, and these are the moments your games are set within. I mean, yeah, bits of the background will change, bits that will, advance ideas within the storyline, but the actual background that you're playing in isn't a story that will have a conclusion, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of little tidbits like that scattered throughout the codexes and army books.
So, if all the Primarchs that are still alive, loyal Primarchs, came back, who do you think would be the next Emperor?
I think the one that should have been Emperor is dead, so who would it be? Who's left? So if we could say, I think the obvious choice would have to be Guilliman then.
Yeah.
And again, funny you should say that, but we'll save developing that one until we get to the heresy.
Yeah, funny I should say this. So you're like trying to give me a hint of what's coming next.
I'm trying to say that it's something that has lurked and appeared in discussions and what have you, but without giving away any surprises that we have in store.
Yeah, I know you can't really tell me much actual stuff that's going to happen. Okay, now moving on to fantasy battles. Not too many questions in here. So, what is your favorite fantasy battles book?
Well, the obvious answer would be The Empire, because that's one I wrote.
Yeah.
And that isn't just me being biased because I wrote it. I mean, I love The Empire. I love the madness of it. You've got the engineers, you've got the wizards, the warrior priests, the crazy sort of proto-Germanic style of flagellant nuttiness, the terror of having these little island villages in amongst this ocean of forest where to venture 50 feet from the walls is death sort of things. I love the craziness and the darkness and the fear of the Empire. I think that's such a potent set of imagery and rules and background to set stories within. And it's the one aspect of stories within GW's universes that I haven't actually touched yet. Yeah. It's a story within the current day Empire, and that's something that I hopefully will rectify soon, because I really just want to get to the guts of the Empire and tell stories within that. Because I've done Warhammer novels, but they've all been either in the Wood Elf realm or High Elves or Kislev, or in the Empire. But back in Sigmar's day, I've not actually done a story hip deep in the crazy of the Empire, and that's something I need to rectify at some point soon. As far as the other army books, the High Elves one I think is a great one. I love their background. Because I didn't like them at first, but the more I read of their story and their background, the more I realised that they weren't all sort of Peter Perfects. There was division within the ranks. There were that the whole doomed race thing, and the sacrifice that Calador and Arian had made at the beginning of time, something. And I thought that had proper, real, epic, high fantasy structure to it, which I thought was brilliant. So they're one of my favourites to just go back and reread. That and the Skaven as well. The Skaven are great fun because they've just got such craziness to them, and I love that aspect of it. And there's such an original race. I love reading about them.
I totally agree about Skaven. I like them too. So, like, if you were giving any topic that you could write about in fantasy battles for Black Library, what would that be?
I think we just answered that there somewhere. An Empire.
So the Empire would be the most.
Empire and Skaven. I think that would be a great novel. But I mean, Clint's doing that at the moment with his Time of Legends novels with Dead Winter.
Very interesting. Okay, now moving on to Iron Warriors. So, will there be a book about Iron Warriors pre-heresy?
Well, really, Angel Exterminatus is, as it turns out, is a heresy book about the Iron Warriors. It didn't start out that way. Originally, it was kind of going to be Fulgrim's story, carrying on from the novel Fulgrim and the Reflection Cracked novella. But very quickly, within the first couple of chapters of writing Angel Exterminatus, I realised that actually no, this isn't Fulgrim's story at all. Fulgrim is the guy who kicks the story into motion, but it's not about him. It's all about Perturabo and how we see him, how he's changed, how he's come to the place he's within, and how he then views the heresy once they get to the end of that novel and he sees what's happened with Fulgrim. So yeah, and I suspect there will be. I mean, there will be more on them, but certainly at the moment there is that book.
Yeah.
That has Iron Warriors and heresy. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that in Angela Exterminatus there was a hint at some certain Iron Warrior who would later become Hansu, or maybe it was his descendant, or I mean his. Hansu is the descendant of this certain Iron Warrior. I forgot his name.
Well,
is there any kind of connection there?
Well, yeah. That's the whole idea is that because Hansu is part Imperial Fist, part Iron Warrior, and with the Fabius's experiments on Cassander and Navarra, he's been using horrible viruses and pathogens and experiments on their biology and physiology, extractions of DNA to try and find out why they're the ones that are just never give up, the ones that don't break. And obviously when he took Iron Warrior blood and genetics from Honourable Sulaka, the assumption or the inference is that some of that was combined along the way, DNA. So yeah, it's not actually it's not a descendant of Hansu, because obviously he's not going to have been born from a mother and a father or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That the idea is that is then something that Fabius has now got and will at some point later do something with. I mean, because Hansu never saw the heresy. He wasn't around.
Yeah.
That fighting.
Too young.
Yeah, he was a little babby back then. So Again, that's not a storyline that I'm planning, or I think anyone should develop. It's more just a little nod to the 40k, as to say, oh, here's where he came from, rather than we'll actually see Honshu in the Heresy, because you won't.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, as far as I know, maybe I'm just not fully aware or not properly educated, but in the chapters due, Honshu could have died, could have escaped, but since well, I think he escaped, right? Is he alive?
Well, have you read any of have you seen the Iron Warriors Omnibus?
No, not. I haven't read them yet.
Right. Okay. There's a story. The ending of the chapters due was kind of deliberately ambiguous in a sense, because I know it writing the story. I knew that whichever way I went, somebody was going to probably be disappointed in terms of, well, my guys didn't win. So I left Honshu's ending in such a way that there's a line in the book somewhere about how, you know, when the Ultramarines fleets come back to Talisar, that they smash the Iron Warriors fleet and only a single vessel manages to escape.
Yeah.
So that, you know, if I needed to, that there was my get out, you know, because Honshu wasn't at the site of the destroyed tomb, he'd taken the crawler, and then, you know, one ship got away. So if I needed to say that, then yeah, I could say he got away in that one. And that was a sort of quick fix, I thought, because I don't want to tie myself down to anything in writing the ending of one book that will then hamstring me for beginning something else. So if I can give myself an out, I can think of something cooler along the way if I need to. And over the, you know, in the year or so since Chapter 2 was released, I thought of something much cooler that I thought, you know, I don't like the idea of Honshu running with his tail between his legs. He needs to have some other, you know, last kind of kicker, last sort of fuck you to the Ultramarines before he goes.
It's okay. No, it's okay. It's no problem.
So there's a story in the Ultramarines Omnibus called "The Beast of Calth,"
yeah,
which will answer your question.
Okay, I get it. Okay, so now moving on to Horus Heresy.
Yeah.
In Last Church, you remember that well. Which side would you take, Emperor or the Preacher? Which is like closer to you?
Well, again, that I'd be on the Emperor's side, without a doubt. But the way I wrote that story was I knew that I had to turn the roles around slightly, otherwise the Emperor, it would just come across as preachy. So in other words, the Emperor is the one who is, in inverted commas, right, but is going about it in a really horrible way. Whereas the priest is the one who is, you know, in inverted commas, wrong, but he's the more sympathetic character. You know, you read the story and you like him, you don't like the Emperor, but he's the one saying the things that, you know, are right in a sense. So yeah, you know, that chime, the way the Emperor, the things the Emperor believes or is telling the priest he believes, they chime very much with you know, my own personal viewpoint. But I thought it'd be a very interesting story to try and tell, because it was because I'd come quite late to the writing of that book, because I was finishing off a novel along the way. And so by the time I came to write my story for that book, I asked Lindsay Priestley, my editor at the time, if she could send me a one-line synopsis for each of the other stories that were in the book, so that I didn't end up duplicating a story that was already pitched, or doing something that they go, oh, actually, we've got 3 stories like that already. And what came across very clearly was that all the stories, you know, mostly were, you know, bangs and bolters and guns and explosions. And I thought, well, you know, when I read a short story anthology, I like variations in the texture of the kinds of stories, the length of them, what they're about, how they're told, and so on. So seeing that, I thought, well, I'm going to try and tell a story that is absolutely different from all of these, that has no gunfire, no fighting, no action, but is still hopefully an exciting and interesting read. And it was a challenging story because I had to really convince Black Library that it would be a story worth telling, that a story worth reading, because they were like, well, you know, is there any fighting in it? Any, you know, is it going to be exciting enough to read? And it's, well, yeah, if I do my job right, then yeah, it should be. And you know, it's certainly the story out of that anthology that I think has had the most reaction to it, and you know, most of that has been really, really good. Most people have really dug the story because it's not about telling you this way or that way is right or wrong. It's about at least asking the question.
Yeah, Last Church was awesome. I think it was awesome. A lot of people work on Horus Heresy. Lots of different authors. So how do you guys coordinate your in-book events between each other?
Well, every few months, maybe we do four meetings a year. We'll all gather at Black Library in Nottingham and basically thrash out all the stuff that's going on. You know, we'll all go around the room and say, you know, what you're working on and what sort of thoughts have you got for stuff that you want to do in the future. So once we go around the room, and then, you know, generally before we've got there, you know, through email, we've had a vague idea of stuff what we need to talk about. You know, like, oh, we need to figure out what forces are involved in this fight, or where are these guys just now, and what stories have we got upcoming that, you know, because obviously there's lots of authors working on it, and, you know, as individual authors, we're probably not aware of a lot of stuff that other people are doing. So, you know, the editors would say, well, okay, we've commissioned a story from so-and-so that's about this aspect. And, you know, just throw everything into the ring so that we can say, actually, well, wait a minute, I'm doing this story here, and he can't possibly be there because he's over there, or, you know, just coordinate all the things that we'd like to be doing, and then, you know, we try to thrash them out there and sort out storylines, or sort out any bits of background that are a bit unclear, or get, you know, Alan Merritt, you know, Games Workshop's keeper of the lore, get him to come in and, you know, say, elaborate on a particular thing that we need clarified before we tell this particular story, or, you know, run things by him that we might think, you know, that's a bit contentious, that might break the lore or bend it, and let's get Alan to say whether that's fine or not before we go and do it. So that's, and even over the course of the year, even between the meetings, you know, I'll send out, you know, we'll all send out, you know, bits and pieces or questions to the group, say, you know, how many moons does this planet have, or is anyone using this guy, or is he dead, or what have you? And, you know, if you're lucky, you'll get an answer back.
Next question is, what did you feel like when you killed Ferrus Manus and turned Fulgrim into a demon-possessed heretic?
Good. Well, I mean, that was at the very, very, very first meeting we had about the heresy, before any of the books had been written, and there's, I don't know, 20 or so of us in Games Workshop's boardroom talking about, you know, how are we going to tell this? What stories do we want? What characters do we want? What's the feel of the story that makes it different from 40k? And Alan Merritt was taking us through the heresy. It was Heresy 101 from the guy who basically wrote the heresy. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of bits that came out of that were things where I thought, oh, right, okay, you know, I've been steeped in this for decades, and
yeah,
you know, I thought, well, I know all this. I don't need this reiterated to me, but so much came out of that I thought, that's great. And when Alan was telling us about the psychology, you know, the story behind the story of Ferrus and Fulgrim, I immediately wrote on my notepad, like an entire page, I will write this story. So it's one that had been in my head ever since, even before the first novel was written. I thought, I want to tell that story of the two brothers that ends up in one of their deaths. And yeah, so coming to write that scene was just something that had been in my head for 5 years, or give or take. And it was great fun to do. I mean, it sounds bad, but doing terrible things to characters and stories is often a lot of fun. So chopping Ferrus's head off was...
He sucked his eyes out.
Yeah, you know, because it's a real culmination of a story. I mean, a lot of times when I write a novel, certainly, I've got ideas a lot of the time I start at the end, or I think that would be a brilliant way to finish a story. And, you know, going into this novel, I knew it was going to end with Ferris dying, obviously. So as a writer, you want to get to those moments of payoff because it's really satisfying writing them. But again, it was one that had to be handled very, very carefully because it had to be, you know, hopefully big enough to say this is a Primarch dying. It's not just a regular Space Marine, it's a Primarch dying. And again, how Fulgrim goes about it had to be handled very carefully because there's several sort of iterations in the background of how it happened. You know, was it Fulgrim who did it? Was it the demon who did it? What was the order of things? So trying to tell it in a way that didn't contradict anything that we'd said before, but still put the onus very firmly on Fulgrim. You know, because it wasn't, because if it was the demon that possessed him and then killed Ferris, suddenly Fulgrim is excused almost of blame. He didn't do it; the demon did it. So it had to be. I had to be very careful writing it that if you read it properly, then it's absolutely Fulgrim to blame for doing it.
Yes.
You know, he knows what he's doing and does it anyway, and that's much more powerful, much more interesting.
Yeah.
It comes later, you know, for for those moments when the mask slips and he does feel a little bit of guilt here and there because, you know, guilt is a sensation to be wallowed in, and that's a very Slaneshi thing, you know, to take any sensation and wring it for all it's worth, and guilt is as good as any. Yeah,
but like, actually, maybe I read it wrong, but after reading Fulgrim, you made me hate all the Emperor's Children and Fulgrim with a passion, being an Ultramarine fan. But that's why, because Fulgrim is a...
And it's written exactly right, and you read it exactly right.
Yeah, because I think that Fulgrim is a pussy. What, like... Why? Why is that? Because he killed...
say that to his face.
He killed his brother, and then he felt this overwhelming sense of guilt, and then he couldn't bear going on with this sense of guilt anymore. And then the demon said, "Look, I can lock your soul away, and I'll just take over." You know.
Well, no, I mean the demon was saying, "I'll give you oblivion. I'll kill you. Essentially, I will give you the oblivion you crave to salve that guilt." And that's where Fulgrim went, "Yeah, okay, I can't deal with this. I've murdered my brother.
Yeah.
I can't live another moment knowing what I've just done." And you know, that's what he lowers his defenses to say, "Yeah, end me. Just end it all now." But of course, that was never the demon's intention, and that's not what he got, obviously.
Yeah, that's why I hate Fulgrim. So, Fulgrim, you know, we're gonna rant a little bit more about the Fulgrim book. Like half of the book is about arts, different arts, like painters and musicians, and you know, blah blah blah. And so, what really inspired you to, you know, present story through different arts as like the Legion degraded?
Well, that's not, you know, 'cause art's a very good way to explore extremes in things, and where beforehand in the novels it had been the Space Marines who'd been corrupted, and the remembrance were almost caught in the crossfire of it. I wanted to turn that on its head a little bit, where it's the remembrancers that are the ones who are corrupted first, and they're the ones drawing the Space Marines into it. So, you know, when they see like the Lair Temple at the beginning, they're the ones that are most easily corrupted, and they start expressing that in the only way they know how, through either, you know, crazy paintings, done with all sorts of horrible substances, through crazy music. I mean, that's the thing. Slanesh isn't just all about boobs and bums.
Yes, definitely.
Slanesh is excess in everything. You know, excess in art, in music, in violence, in sex, in murder, in colour, and everything's turned up to 13. So, you know, I thought for the humans to do that, it would be a great way to express it through art. And given Fulgrim's love of perfection and love of beautiful things, again, it seemed like an appropriate, you know, sort of metaphor for how the art once started as, you know, because the first thing you see when Fulgrim is a wonderful piece of art. You know, it's a symphony from Becca Kinska.
Yep.
And he comes in there, and it's wonderful. But by the end of the story, that's transformed into this hellish din, this mad Slaneshi opera. So, you know, using the art was a way of sort of visually painting how the leader was degrading through the course of the book.
Вы только что посмотрели первую часть интервью с Грэмом Макниллом, одним из самых лучших писателей Black Library. Продолжение ждите очень и очень скоро. Let the battle begin.